Welcome back to another episode of the Get Your Popcorn podcast. I never introduced myself on here. My name is Holly, and I host and create this show. I also want to announce that I'm going to be going to the Vancouver International Film Festival this year. I got selected as media for that, so that's pretty freaking crazy. I'm pretty excited. So I'll be putting out a lot of content in October all about that because it starts on October 2nd to the 12th. So I'm pretty excited. I also, again, start off every episode with just directing if you are wanting to donate to what's happening in Gaza or what's happening in Ukraine. I have links in my Instagram bio to the Red Cross directly. So please donate there. Make sure that we are advocating for people in the world that are experiencing these humanitarian crises. Make sure to contact your local MPMLA if you're from Canada and make your feelings heard about what's going on. They're not doing nearly enough, particularly in Gaza, about the humanitarian crisis. Kids are starving. We need to make sure that we're amplifying our voices and making sure that the aid is getting to them. There's a donation link there, or your MP about what the federal government needs to be doing. Please make sure you're doing that. Again, as I say at the beginning of every episode, if I get a flood of hate comments, I will just turn off comments for this episode. Yeah, I think we should all be against starving children, full stop. Anyway, so this episode is the conclusion of our Summer of Spielberg. I can't believe how fast this has gone. It feels pretty crazy. And I'm concluding it with the 1985 film The Color Purple. So trigger warning for this episode. The Color Purple is a 1985 adaptation of Alice Walker's novel of the same name. It deals with topics of child sexual abuse, incest, and spousal abuse. Steven Spielberg has been a controversial director of this film given the nature of the story being predominantly about African American characters. He's been criticized by the NAACP for the depiction of black men as abusers in this film. This must be acknowledged and respected. He has been defended and praised heavily by the cast over the last 40 years for his work and the care he took in telling the story that to them felt sincere. He shied away from queer relationships in the book at his own admission of being out of his own depth, which is such a pivotal and important part of the novel. I think it's important to discuss this film and critique it as it has had a huge impact on cinema. I think it's important to criticize directors for their missteps, even when it seems to have been done with the best of intentions. We also need to acknowledge the whitewashing of narratives and to call out white directors that have been given opportunities that were not given to equally as talented black directors. Institutionalized racism needs to be broken down from within and not just from the outside. Steven Spielberg was not the best choice for director for this film, and through the Summer of Spielberg series, I feel it would be a disservice to only discuss his wins. I need to also discuss the controversies of his career as well, which includes having an opportunity that should have been given to somebody else. I will try to handle this as sensitively as I can. I'm committed to my own learning, and I am more than welcoming to any and all feedback on this topic. Clearly, I am white, and well, for those of us watching the video version of this. And I'm also wearing a Princess Jasmine t-shirt. So I will be handling this as best as I can as a white woman in a Princess Jasmine t-shirt. Obviously, this is not my lived experience. I knew that Steven Spielberg felt like an odd choice to direct this film, but it wasn't until I actually did my research in the creation of this episode that I realized that he had been such a controversial choice and that there were voices in 1985 voicing that this was controversial. I read Alice Walker's novel in high school, and I had only ever seen, because I own the DVD of it, I'd only ever seen the documentary and the making of that involves the cast. And I had seen interviews with the cast and specials and stuff because I watched the Oprah Winfrey show when that was on, and she would kind of have everybody come back and talk about The Color Purple periodically. And she had such positive things to say, and all the cast through interviews over the last 40 years of this film have said such positive things and how much they loved working with Spielberg and how happy they were with the final product. This includes Oprah and Danny Glover and Whoopi Goldberg and Margaret Avery. I had only had that side of it. I was not aware of all the other stuff. So I'm still learning this. So I'm going to do my best to talk about it and talk about what I read and give us this as much nuance as possible. But I'm going to do my best here. I'm kind of wading through the weeds. And of course, I've got as much experience as Steven Spielberg on this particular topic in terms of, my experience and understanding of African-American stories and culture. It probably even less so because I'm not American. So I'm going to do my best. I understand I'm not going to be able to give the full nuance, but I do think it's important that I discuss that he was a controversial choice for this as director. And upon rewatch, because I have not seen this film in about 10 years, the plot hole, the holes in which he was not able to understand are glaringly obvious, in a way that, when I was 16 or 17, when I saw this film for the first time, I didn't understand. Full transparency, though, I do like this movie. I think the love that the cast and the crew had in the creation of this film and their closeness and the common goal of telling this story really shines through. I think it was a film that was made with a lot of love and a lot of care. Spielberg is very clearly the wrong director. Moments of this that work really well and others that really take away from what should have been included with the novel. Like I talked about in our little trigger warning there, the Seeley, our main character in the book, has a sexual relationship with Shug, or who's played by Margaret Avery. And it is this very beautiful story within the novel that is just basically largely left out of the film. And it's such an important part of the book. This film, upon rewatch, does not give nuance to the Black men in the film. They are largely portrayed as abusive, kind of full stop. Harpo is given some sort of comedic levity, and you can see a little more that Harpo is a product of abuse himself, but there just isn't enough nuance to them. And I didn't see that upon the first watch. And also, I was a teenager when I first watched this, and I think your understanding of the world is different. Steven Spielberg is the wrong person. This should have been given to a Black director. There's plenty of extremely talented Black directors that are not given the opportunities that somebody like Spielberg has been given, especially in 1985. But I think it's still true in 2025. And given what's happening with the Trump administration right now and the changes they're wanting to make to museums to make them less woke and, dismantle some of the stuff and about slavery and soften it, which is just insane. We don't talk about slavery enough. We don't. And we don't talk about the atrocities enough. We are shielded from it. And I just think to say that that's, there's putting too much focus and blame on how horrible it is just disgusting. Like, this should be talked about all the time. In the way that, here in Canada, we have the residential school system, which I feel is not talked about enough. Anyway, so this is the point of view I'm trying to come from this, guys, and I hope that comes across through the episode, that I'm trying to talk about this film. And yes, this has its wins, and yes, the experience of the cast is great, but this is a director who was given an opportunity that should have been given to somebody else. And I think it's important to talk about. So I will talk about the things that are done well, because this is not a bad film. This is a good film. I think there is points to this film that are not what they should be, but it is a well-made film, and it's a incredibly, incredibly, incredibly well acted film. There is not a single acting performance in this film that is not incredible. And it launched the careers of so many important people in the film industry now. Oprah Winfrey, who went on to be one of the most successful people of all time. Danny Glover, this is sort of his launching pad into the film industry. He's amazing. Margaret Avery is so talented, and for whatever reason did not get launched from this film, and she should have. And we've got, Whoopi Goldberg. Like, the list goes on and on. Like, this is an incredibly well acted film. And I think that's able to make up for some of the shortcomings of the direction. I don't think it's a coincidence that the film was nominated for Best Picture, but not Best Director. There are moments that Spielberg is talented, and particularly when we're talking about the interpersonal relationship between Celie and her sister Nettie, that I think are done really well, because I think Steven Spielberg has a great understanding of broken family dynamics. But there's other things that are not done well and are, for worse, more cinematic than they should be, or more simplified. Or the choices that he makes, particularly when we're shooting the scenes in Africa, that I think are much less than culturally sensitive. Part of that is Steven Spielberg being white, and part of that is him being white in 1985. He's the wrong director for this film. And there's actually a really great quote from Denzel Washington that he did on his press tour during Fences that I'd like to read out. And I think it perfectly sums up what I think the point I'm trying to make is, and what when we talk about things, what we should. So Denzel said, "It's not color, it's culture." Steven Spielberg did Schindler's List, and Marty Scorsese did Goodfellas. Steven Spielberg could direct Goodfellas, and Martin Scorsese could probably do a good job directing Schindler's List, but there are cultural differences. I know, and you know, we all know what it's like when a hot comb hits your head on Sunday morning and what it smells like. That's a cultural difference, not just a color difference. And he's right. And I think in a much less serious tone, we can talk about this in terms of films like Greta Gerwig directs from quite a feminist lens. The Barbie movie is so successful because of Greta Gerwig's understanding of the female perspective. And it hit a note that registered with female audiences specifically that I noticed when male critics reviewed the movie. They just didn't even hear. And I think it's because you have to have that lived experience. And that is a problem innately with this version of The Color Purple, is that there is notes that Steven Spielberg as a white man cannot hear because it is not his lived experience. And so I'm going to talk about the film. Again, I think it's a well-made film, but this could have been that much more elevated and much more nuanced had it have been given to an African-American director, which it should have been in the first place, because this isn't the story for a white Jewish man to tell. I think it's okay to admit when you're out of your depths. I mean, he definitely did with the queer relationship. But then he continued to still do the film. And if you read a script and you go, oh, I don't know how to understand this or deal with this or shoot this in a capacity in the way that it needs to be, then I think it's a personal responsibility to be able to get like this is a film that should be directed by somebody else. If I'm not willing to go there, then I shouldn't go there at all. And so I think it is important to talk about this. So I hope I'm talking about this with as much nuance as I can, guys, and just know that I'm trying to come from a really good place. If I have shortcomings, I am trying. I am doing my best to kind of learn about all this. And I want to be an advocate for, there are a ton of points in Hollywood where opportunities have been given to people that it shouldn't have been. So for the pre-production of this film, initially Alice Walker was really nervous about selling the rights to her book because she had seen the way that African American people had been portrayed in Hollywood and the way that the stories were often kind of gutted or changed a lot, and she was really worried. Quincy Jones was actually spearheaded a lot of this, and he was the one that was kind of able to win her over a little bit. And essentially the way Steven Spielberg got the job is Steven Spielberg was, had directed, I think, 4 or 5 of the highest grossing films of all time at this point. And he essentially was selected by Quincy Jones because of the power that he had in Hollywood, that he believed that Steven Spielberg would be able to get this project that would have largely been kind of ignored as it's predominantly, it is an African-American story that wouldn't have had the weight it needed to be pulled through Hollywood because of the lack of representation and power that the African-American community had in Hollywood. Quincy Jones was aware that this was a story he needed a powerful white director in order to get the movement and momentum behind it that he needed to get the story told. So he selected Steven Spielberg. And I think it's important to remember how crazy that is. Steven Spielberg's movie before this was like Temple of Doom. And he had done Temple of Doom and E.T. and Raiders and Jaws and Close Encounters. Like, this is a version of Steven Spielberg that is about to direct The Color Purple. Like, that's a wild take. Alice Walker was pretty unconvinced, of course, because Steven Spielberg had largely done like sci-fi action stuff. And she met with him and she really liked Steven Spielberg. And I'll read a quote by her. "The ease which we took to each other. You don't want to be going off with anybody where you're feeling nervous. He turned out to be a real human being, somebody who knew that he was in the presence of our people." So that's what she had to say. She said that she really liked him because it was very clear that he had read the book. He had a lot of really insightful questions about the characters and clearly had a love and good understanding of the characters. So that sort of was what won her over, along with Quincy Jones saying, like, look, if we want to get our story told, we need somebody powerful behind us. And the fact that Quincy Jones, was powerful in his own right, felt that he needed Spielberg in order to get this story done, I think says a lot about, the distribution of power in Hollywood in the 1980s when this film was being made. So initially, Alice Walker did the first draft of the script, which Spielberg did not like, and they wanted it to be reworked. The screenplay was written by Menno Meyjes, who is Dutch. So this Like, that is it is so wild that The Color Purple is, directed by Steven Spielberg and written by some Dutch guy. Seems pretty crazy. However, Alice Walker did like this screenwriter because he was from an area that used a lot of folk speak, so she felt that he had a really good understanding of the language of the book. For casting, we have Whoopi Goldberg as Celie. She had actually reached out to Alice Walker herself and pitched herself, who then brought her forward to Steven Spielberg, and they went and saw her stand up, and she was actually cast for that. Whoopi Goldberg was pretty much just doing like theater and one-woman shows at this point. She was not a big name by any means. We have Danny Glover as Albert, or Mr. He was the first choice for casting by Steven Spielberg, and he didn't have to audition. He was just offered the role. We have Adolph Caesar as Old Mister. We have Margaret Avery as Shook Avery. We have Ray Don Chong as Squeak. We have Oprah Winfrey as Sophia, and she actually got her audition because Quincy Jones saw her on television doing a news report when he was out in Chicago. And at the time, Oprah was really obsessed with the book. She wanted The Color Purple. She talks a lot about this when she talks about manifesting, that she wanted to be in The Color Purple so badly. And so she got the call, she auditioned for Quincy, and then flew out to LA and auditioned for Spielberg and got the part. We have Akusa Busa as Nettie, and we have Willard Pugh as Harpo. So as far as filming, the cast describes the set as very, very collaborative. They describe Steven Spielberg of kind of being very aware of his own limitations as a director and wanted a lot of input from the actors. Danny Glover and him just both describe wanting to have a more nuanced portrayal of Mr. and wanting to not come from a place of judgment, but come from a place of understanding that Mr. is also a product of abuse. I don't know if it does work as well with Mr. as it does with someone like Harpo. I think Harpo, it's a little more clear. I think Mr., for a large part, does just kind of seem quite evil. Danny Glover found it very, very difficult to play the role. He found it really emotionally taxing. There's several scenes, including the one where he has to pull Nettie and Celie apart, that he would be shaking between takes, like violently shaking, and it would really take it out of him. That scene was very difficult for not only Danny, but the other two actresses who are playing the younger versions at the time, and for the crew to watch. And so each setup is done in one take. I think they had 4 or 5 setups, but they did it in one take because Spielberg could see the effect that it had on everybody, and he didn't want to extend it. When they did one take, done, move on. A couple of minutes to take a breath and do it again. Whoopi Goldberg was pretty new to acting, and the way that she connected through her character into Steven was they were both like quite big film nerds, and so he would make kind of touchstone points to different references to different scenes in movies to describe the way that the emotion he wanted to come across, and Whoopi and him connected quite heavily through that and their love of film that they shared. So that was how Whoopi kind of got to where she needed to get to in her character. Oprah and Akusa attended almost all of the days of filming, whether or not they were on the call sheet or not. They just loved being a part of the film. They loved the characters. They loved the cast and the crew and just wanted to be a part of everything. Oprah found it difficult and out of her depth to get into the character of Sophia, and she felt like she came into her own during the Thanksgiving dinner scene near the end, where she felt so in touch with her character. She was kind of just almost absentmindedly rocking, and Steven Spielberg sort of picked up that there was something going on, and he just said, he just kept the cameras rolling, said, "How do you feel? Like, tell me what you think." And she ad-libbed that entire monologue. The whole cast describes being quite sad when the production was over. They had all grown quite close during the filming, and it was hard for them. They didn't want it to be done. They didn't want to, stop coming to work, which I think does say a lot about the environment of the set that was created, and why I feel like, despite the film's, shortcomings, I think it does shine through every frame that everyone in this film involved really did want to do a good job and did care for each other and did care so deeply about the material. Steven Spielberg describes this as his first adult movie, and it is. It's his first adult movie. And It's coincided with the birth of his first child, and actually the crying of Seeley's babies in the beginning of the film are recordings of Spielberg's own newborn crying. So this film was quite the box office success. It made $98 million on a $15 million budget. So this has 73% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 3.9 on Letterboxd. I gave it 4. And my review is a great film with iconic performances, but unfortunately a product of its times. Shies away from the queer relationships and is a gaping hole that's missing from the book. Although this film has its problems, I believe the dedication of the cast and crew shines through each frame. Roger Ebert says, "The Color Purple is not the story of suffering, but of victory. And by the end of this story, the film has moved me and lifted me up as few films had. It was a great, warm, hard, unforgiving triumph of a movie, and there is not a scene that does not shine with the love of the people who made it," which I think is true. There's a lot of criticism from many different critics that this film is overly sentimental and too Spielbergian, which, like I've said, is true for some scenes, and in some scenes it doesn't work. And like I said earlier, the NAACP accused the film of stereotyping portrayals of Black men. And I think that's true. I think, when I watched the film the first time, for me, it was more, I saw it as these individual characters are this way. But, if we think about it and we zoom out a bit, there are so few films, especially this time, made about African American people. And if the only examples we have in media of these, starring characters of African American men are so negative, that does have such a large impact. It isn't as though the same level of opportunity is being given to as it is to white characters at this time, where we have so many characters that are whites. Who cares if a few of them are terrible? It doesn't have as much impact as, let's say, we've got one this year, one big blockbuster movie having Black characters, and the only examples we have in this one blockbuster movie of Black characters is this negative stereotype. And that's just something, I didn't understand upon first viewing of this film, and I think, people don't necessarily understand now. I will give a quote from Steven Spielberg about this, and I think he doesn't, I think he doesn't understand in this quote what he did. And it said, "Most of the criticism came from directors who felt that we had overlooked them and that it should have been a Black director telling a Black story. That was the main criticism. The other criticism was that I had softened the book. I have always copped to that. I made the movie I wanted to make from Alice Walker's book, and there was certain things in the lesbian relationship between Shug, Avery, and Seeley that were finely detailed in the book, and I didn't feel I could get a PG-13 rating, and I was shy about it. And in a sense, perhaps I was the wrong director to acquit some of the more sexually honest encounters between Shook and Seeley. Because I softened them, I basically took something that was erotic and very intentional, and I reduced it to a simple kiss, and I got a lot of criticism from that." Yeah, I think it's a real big cop-out to say that the criticism came from directors that wanted to direct the film. They should have directed the film, and it should be criticized as offered about the film, that they're having somebody that doesn't understand the material to the level that somebody else would have makes you not as good of a choice. The Color Purple was nominated for 11 Academy Awards and did not win a single one. It was nominated for Best Picture against Out of Africa, Kiss of the Spider Woman, Prizzi's Honor, and Witness, and Out of Africa won. I do think The Color Purple should have beaten Out of Africa. Have you seen Out of Africa? It is so dull. Steven Spielberg, like I said, was not nominated for Best Director, nor should he have been. I think it's a real disservice that Danny Glover was not nominated for Best Actor. I think he's tremendous in this film. Best Actress in a Leading Role, Whoopi Goldberg was nominated against Geraldine Page and Bancroft, Jessica Lange, and Meryl Streep, and Geraldine Page won, which I think is pretty ridiculous. Again, no one was nominated in the Best Supporting Actor role, which I think there was a couple of nominations that could have happened for sure. I don't know if they would have put Danny Glover in supporting just because he isn't necessarily like a lead of the film. I consider him to be essentially kind of one of the protagonists / antagonists. He is for sure one of the main characters, but they could have nominated him for supporting. For Best Actress in a Supporting Role, Angelica Houston won over both Margaret Avery and Oprah Winfrey, along with Amy Madigan and Meg Tilly. I think Margaret Avery should have taken this. I thought she was fantastic as Shug. It's a real disservice she didn't win. It was nominated again for Best Adapted Screenplay and lost to Out of Africa. It was nominated for Best Music but lost to Out of Africa. Okay, Guys, I think a real problem with this movie, sorry, love you, Quincy Jones, but the music is awful. The music is what adds to the cheesiness of some of the stuff. It feels like Quincy Jones is trying to do a John Williams score, and it's very weird to have like Jurassic Park sounding music in the background of child abuse. It is weird. The music, I think, is a big problem in the film in terms of like the tone of the film. And as to sort of the Disney criticism of it, or the Disneyification of the film, is overly sweet. And I think the music has a lot to do with it because it's quite jarring when you're listening to it. So I don't think that should have won. For Best Original Song, Miss Seeley's Blues was nominated, and it lost to Say You Say Me from White Nights, which I've never heard of. I really love Miss Seeley's Blues, and I think that should have won. That was one of the songs I did like. Best Art Direction, it lost to Out of Africa. Best Cinematography, it lost to Out of Africa. This film is beautiful. I really do think that would have been a good winner as well. Best Costumes, it lost to Rand. So it didn't win any of the Academy Awards, which feels crazy to me. I do think Margaret Avery, if we even just won, Margaret Avery should have gotten the Oscar. She deserved it. So we'll get into the plot. I generally read quite a lot of quotes. I'm not going to for quite obvious reasons in the film. So I'm going to break down the plot best I can. So the film opens up with Celie and Nettie, they're two sisters, are running through a field. They're playing sort of the, those hand games, the like clapping games. There's a lot of laughing. They're quite young. And as they run out of this sort of field, we see that one of the girls, Celie, is quite heavily pregnant. We see her bump. And then we see their father approaching, and both girls are laughing. And Celie is told by her father that she has the ugliest smile. We then cut to, pretty jarringly, Celie giving birth, and with a voiceover explaining that this is the second baby she's had by her father. And we learn that Celie is a victim of incestuous abuse from her father. And immediately upon birth, before Celie even has a chance to hold her baby, he takes her baby away and says, "Don't tell anybody but God." And as somebody who's had a baby myself, that scene, like, so heartbreaking. I can't imagine. Like, I helped pull my daughter out and put her on my chest, and I didn't want to let her go. Like, I can't imagine, like, you're so vulnerable. You're so vulnerable in that moment. And I can't imagine upon all the other complex dynamics, we see like Nettie who's like 12, is helping deliver her baby in like the middle of the winter with like no drugs. Like, this is like, I think 1909 or 1902, actually, at the beginning of the story. Like, it's a brutal, brutal scene. So Celie has no idea what happens to her children. This is the second one her father's took, whether or not he sold them or killed them. She has no idea. We then cut to a scene of the two girls in church, and Nettie's sort of getting the attention from a man, who at this point in the story we only know as Mr., who comes over to try and ask their father if he can marry her. And her father says, "No, but you can have Celie." So Mr. has 3 kids who he, uses corporal punishment in order to sort of control. His house is in complete disarray. And he basically uses Celie as a maid. And we see scenes of marital rape for Celie because she is, not consenting, and she kind of just completely disassociates and looks at this photo of a woman on the nightstand and calls her the pretty woman in the picture, and wonders if Albert, who, we don't know, and wonders if Mr. has this sort of relationship with her and whether or not she enjoys it. We then cut to a scene where Celie she thinks she sees her daughter in a store with a pastor's wife, and she's pretty sure it's her daughter, who she had named Olivia, but she can't. There's no proof of that. And then the woman ends up, taking her daughter away. Nettie then shows up at Mr. and Celie's house to escape the abuse of her father, who's now trying to molest Nettie as well. Yeah, this film's dark, guys, really dark. Nettie stays with them, and she's teaching Celie to read because Celie had to drop out of school because she kept having babies, and Nettie was able to stay in school so Nettie can read, and she's trying to teach Celie to read in case they ever get separated. They can write each other letters. And Nettie's way home from school one day, Mr. tries to assault her, and she fights him off, and then he kicks her out of the house, and it's this absolutely gut-wrenching scene, which I will give Spielberg credit for. I think it's incredibly well directed. And he said to the 2 actresses, like, no matter what you do not let him separate you. And it is like, oh, gonna try not to cry, but he's like, they're like holding on to each other for dear life. And he's like, Mr.'s like, they grab a tree and Mr.'s like beating their hands and he's pulling them apart. And Nettie has this like scene where or this moment where she like raises her hand. She goes, why? And Mr. picks up dirt and just throws it in her face. And it's so horrible to watch. And I think Spielberg's like concept of family dynamics and like fucked up family dynamics, I think shines through in this, and the like dependence on siblings, I think sometimes in order to get you through. Because Nettie is the only person Celie has in the world, the only person that really loves Celie. We then cut to a scene where Celie is shaving Mr. with a straight razor as he waits for a letter from Shug. Celie then asks if Nettie sent a letter, and Mr. threatens her that if she ever touches the mail, that he'll know and he'll hurt her. We then see a scene where Celie goes to try and read a book, and she sits down in a rocking chair and she's rocking, and then we kind of move forward in time, and then Celie, who's now played by Whoopi Goldberg, gets up and walks out, which I love that cut shot. I think it's great. We see that Celie has become much more timid through years and years of abuse, and we see that Mr. is now going to go see Shug Avery, who's the pretty woman in the picture, and Celie's helping him get ready. She seems kind of fascinated by the whole thing, and she sees this like different side to Mr. because he is so excited and giddy to go and see this woman. And I do think these are these little glimpses of humor that I think lighten the film. I think this film would be essentially like trauma porn the whole time if we didn't have these little moments of humor that's sprinkled throughout. And I do think that is a lot of Spielbergian kind of little light jokes that are done either with camera movement or facial expressions or great cuts that I think lighten the film. And I do think that's part of the film that's done well, is we do have these little like moments to breathe. And this is one of them. It's so fucked up that she's helping him get ready to go see his mistress, but these little cuts kind of like give you a bit of a moment to catch your breath. We learn that she's never received a letter from Nettie, and so she wonders if she's dead. We then cut to a scene where Celie's doing a voiceover that Harpo has met a girl named Sophia and has gotten her pregnant, and they're going to get married. And so Mr. is meeting Sophia, and he's not impressed and basically accuses her of sleeping around. And Sophia is not afraid to stand up to him at all. And she, says to Mr., everything he needs to say, and basically says, Harpo, like, if you're going to stay here and listen, like, I'm not going to wait too long. And then we have a great cut where she turns and she says, Harpo, and then we cut to the wedding. And I like that little cut. We then see that, then this is a scene where I feel like maybe the lightness of the way the scene is done is a disservice to the film. I'll say that, the like Spielbergian jokey thing is like a bit much, where we learn that Sophia is like the head of the household and very much makes all the decisions, and Harpo is not great with that, and Mr. is trying to suggest to him that he hit her to make it better, but it's done with like this very like light joking tone, which I feel like is odd. And Harpo talks to Celie about it, and Celie also suggests like you need to beat her to take her down a peg. And this just like speaks to the cycle of abuse that happens, where hurt people essentially. Sophia then, gives Harpo what for when he tries to hit her. And we have another cut to where Harpo's explaining to Mr. that I think he says he was like kicked by a donkey or something, and Mr. saying, well, it looks like a fist. And so it's done in a really light, jokey tone, but it's pretty horrible. And then Sophia goes and confronts Celie in this like amazing, amazing scene where she explains that she comes from a house with a long line of abuse, and that she had to fight her father and her brothers and her uncles, and that a girl is not safe in a home full of men. And she says, I'm not going to fight in my own home. So if Harpo tries to hit me again, I'm going to kill him. And she suggests to Celie that Celie do the same with Miss. And then we learn that Harpo continues to try to hit Sophia, and Sophia continues to hit Harpo, and eventually she leaves and takes the children. We then cut to a scene where Mr. brings home Shug Avery, and Shug is a singer and has been, like we've said, the long-term like mistress of Mr. And she kind of comes in the door, she's stumbling in drunk, and she looks Celie in the face and says to Celie, you're ugly, as the first thing she says to Celie. And Celie kind of is taken aback, and she describes being like glued to her spot. She just wanted to take a look at this woman. Book is quite sick and needs to stay with them. It isn't explicitly said in the either the book or the movie, what she has. Later, Sister's father describes her as having nasty woman's disease. So I'm assuming that's some sort of STD, but that wouldn't make her sick. So there's some suggestion based on the time period that it might be tuberculosis. It's unclear. Celie, who has kind of had this parasocial relationship with Shug via her photograph, has kind of a liking to her and likes that she gets to see this side of Mister, where he is quite subservient to Shug. Shug is not afraid to tell him off. She's not afraid to demand what she needs from him. And so she's kind of fascinated by this dynamic between the two of them. And this is where she learns her husband's name. To this point, he's only known as Mister. And here we know him as Albert, because that's what Shug calls him. Albert even tries to cook for Shug. He's extremely bad at it. Shug throws it at the wall. It's so bad. And she's a bit delirious. Celie takes over the caretaking of her, including helping her bathe. And there's a scene where Celie's helping her bathe, and Shug is delirious and starts kind of confessing about her children that she's given away because they didn't have dads, and confesses that she has a father who doesn't speak to her because of her kind of promiscuous and wild lifestyle. Albert's father comes for a visit, and this is where we see sort of the pattern of abuse that Albert was taught. The way that they call him Old Mister speaks to Albert, speaks to the children, speaks to Celie, speaks about women, speaks about colorism within the African-American community. He very much looks down on Shug because she's quote unquote like too black, and some of those different dynamics. I do not know enough about that to delve into that, but I'm just relaying like these are some of the things that he talks about. And Celia, who has developed quite a liking for Shug, spits in his water. And there's this is a Spielbergian moment that I think is great, where he builds a lot of tension, where we see that Celia spit in his water before she brings it to him, as he's like saying all these terrible things about Shug, and he kind of doesn't drink the water for a while, but eventually downs the glass. We then cut to Harpo has a new relationship with a woman named Squeak, or that's her nickname, and he opens a juke joint, and Shug, as she gets better, begins to perform there. You can see that Celie is more and more taken with Shug as time goes on. This is expressed largely through eye contact. Celie, for being the main character, has not a ton of lines, given the fact that she's, so timid from years and years of abuse, that she doesn't voice up her opinion too much. When we do hear from Celie, it's most of her talking to God via voiceover. And Shug, in turn, takes quite a liking to Celie. And they go down to the juke joint, her and Mister, to go and see Shug perform. And all these women are calling her maid and making fun of her because everybody knows that Shug is Mister's mistress. And Shug writes and performs a song about Celie. And this is the only quote I'm going to read because I love it so much. The song is great. It says, "Sister, you've been on my mind. Sister, we're two of a kind. So sister, I'm keeping my eyes on you. I bet you think I don't know nothing but singing the blues. Oh, sister, I've got some news for you. I'm something, and I hope you think that you're something too." I love that. And it just like Celie, and through the whole movie, she smiles, but she covers her smile because she's obviously been told her whole life that she's ugly. But you can just see she does this, she's so happy that Shug has done this for her. And then she goes over and she kind of gives this little look to the women that, were making fun of her. Sophia then comes to the juke with her new boyfriend. Harpo's not impressed. And here, her and Harpo end up dancing for a little bit, much to Squeak's dismay, who then comes over and makes fun of Sophia and calls her fat and slaps her. And then Sophia kind of knocks her out, and there's this barroom brawl scene. We then cut to my favorite scene in the movie, which it had been a jumping off point to launch into the relationship between Shug and Celie. I would think that it was perfect, but this is all we see of the sort of sexual relationship or romantic relationship between Shug and Celie, when it is much more present in the book. But it's this beautiful scene of Shug having Celie try on her kind of showgirl clothes, and she keeps trying to not look at herself and covering her smile, and Shug, is trying to hold her hands and down and have her smile. And for the first time, we see Celie look in the mirror and laugh, and her whole smile. And Shug tells her how beautiful she is. And, they're talking, and Shug's explaining that she's going to go back to Memphis. And Celie begs her not to. He says, "No, you can't. He beats me when you're not here." And she says, "Well, why does he beat you?" And Celie says, "He beats me for not being you." And they talk about the difference in their relationship with Mister. That, Shug sleeps with Mr. and, enjoys it. And she has this, sort of friends with benefits relationship that she quite enjoys with Albert, who she calls him. And Seeley describes it as Mr. doing his business on her. And, Shug says, well, it sounds like he's going to the bathroom on you. And Seeley says, well, that's how it feels. And Shug, says, well, then you're still a virgin. And I think that's such a profound piece of dialogue. And I think part of the reason why I connected so heavily to The Color Purple in the first place was I'm a victim of, or survivor, however, I'm not too fussed about what it's called, but, of childhood sexual abuse, years and years of it. And this portion of the book, I think, and the movie was something so powerful for me. And, when I first watched this movie, it was before I had told anybody about it. And so to see the emotions of that and, the experience of having had technically, physically, the things happen to me, but not have the emotional connection to it and still having a character voice that is more than just the act. It is like the consensual portion of it as well was really powerful for me to hear. And it's still powerful for me to hear as an adult who's now done like 15 years worth of therapy to deal with some of that stuff. But I think it's a very poignant part, and I think it's in a very sort of pivotal scene in the film when talking about consent in relationship to sexuality. And I think it's just not delved into the Shug character enough, because there is this complex part where she has this understanding, and yet she still continues to have a relationship with Albert, as she calls him, when knowing all the terrible things he's done to Seeley. And having this sort of like flip-flopping between her relationship with Seeley and Albert, and then in the book, outside people as well. She's just such an interesting and complex character herself. And this is such an interesting and complex relationship. And it's just such a disservice that this is the only scene we see from it when we have so many good ones in the book. I wish that this was like kind of yes-anded with this scene, because this scene is great. And then if we had a little more throughout the rest of the movie, it would have been perfect, because this scene is masterfully directed. And then at the end of the scene, they share a kiss, and that's it. We then see Shug confront her father, who's a preacher. She goes to the church, which is just down the road, because she's grown up in this town, and he won't even acknowledge her. Seeley then packs her own things because she decides she's going to go to Memphis with Shug, but she is caught by Mr. and sort of loses the courage. So Shug leaves on a horse and carriage to Memphis, and Seeley collapses in grief. We then cut to a scene where the mayor's wife is in town, and we see who is white, obviously, given the time period, and Sophia is in town with her children, and the mayor is acting as though Sophia's children are like puppies or something. She's like pinching their cheeks when like clearly, like, A, she doesn't know them, and B, like they are so uncomfortable. And you can see that Sophia doesn't really know what to do or say, because this is the fine line for her to walk. And then the mayor's wife says, your children are so clean, which is just like, what the fuck? What the fuck? Like, yeah, she's a good mom, of course. But there's so many racial undertones to that. But it's like, yeah, she's a mom who takes care of her children. Like, of course, her kids are like, there's so many disgusting racial undertones to that. And she says, how will you be my maid? Sophia says, no. The mayor's wife kind of goes, what? And then she goes, hell no. And the mayor comes over and slaps Sophia for what she says, and Sophia hits him back. And then all these people come and swarm her, all these white people, and they're screaming at her. And then we see a cop come over, and he sort of beats Sophia into submission, and it's this like horrible shot. Oh my God, it's so awful, where she's beaten with the back of a gun, and oh my God, okay. I probably cried a couple weeks ago, guys. I made it farther than I thought it was going to. This film really makes me cry. She falls down and her dress kind of flies up. And just the like, not only being beaten for standing up for herself, but just the like humiliation portion of her being on the ground with her dress up, and everyone's standing around and just watching this happen, and not only watching it but encouraging it. It's just so way more horrific than any horror movie I've ever seen. Like, it just is so horrible what happens to Sophia through this. I mean, through all of them, but I think you see so much more of the systemic oppression through Sophia's character than you do through the others. It makes me so sad that this happens to people still, and that there are people that deny that this is a problem. And I don't know. Okay, I'm fine. It's not about my tears. And so she's sent to prison. We cut forward 8 years in time, and we see Sophia. She's gotten old. In the time, she's got kind of a swollen eye from where she was hit with the gun. I don't know if maybe they broke a bone in there, but her one eye is sort of swollen, most of the time shut. Looks like she's maybe a deformity in there now. And she is not Sophia. Like, she is a hollow, empty shell and man walking person. She's released from prison early, only to be immediately ordered by a judge to end up being Miss Millie, who's the mayor's wife's maid anyway. She's not seen her children in 8 years. She's then, we have a scene where she's, able to go to her, they're letting her, quote unquote, go see her children for a few hours on Christmas. And Miss Millie drives her there. But Miss Millie isn't too great with a car and is unable to get out of Sophia's driveway. Sophia's family tries to help her. Miss Millie is like terrified, panics. And even though they're just trying to help her, it's just basically sort of semi-accusing them that they're going to hurt her or rape her because they're Black, which is just horrific. And so she says Sophia has to come back with her to help her. Even though Sophia says, my friend can drive you home and his wife. And she's like, well, I don't know her. I don't know them either. Shug then returns to see Celia and Albert, but she's now gotten married to her husband, whose name is Grady, and Shug's career has kind of taken off. She's getting a recording contract. And we see that both Celia and Albert are almost kind of aligned in this, and they're both very sort of heartbroken. Albert and Grady begin to get along and kind of become drinking buddies. Shug one day goes out to get the mail because, of course, she's allowed and Celia's not, and she sees her father kind of driving past, and she tries to talk to him, and he, again, just completely ignores her. But Shug finds a letter from Nettie, and in the letter, we find out that Nettie is working for the couple that Celia had seen in the store that day. That was her baby, and Nettie is working for that family and takes care of Celia's children. So Celia and Shug realize that Mr. must have been keeping these letters. So when him and Grady go out to the juke, they search the whole house and they end up finding all the letters behind a chest and under some floorboards. And there's dozens and dozens of Nettie's letters for over the years. And Celia reads them all. And she learns that Nettie works with them. They've gone over for a missionary over to Africa, that Celia's children are, very smart and very outgoing, very independent. And they're, working closely with the families there and building schools. And so Celia realized that Mr. has kept all of this from her. We then cut to a scene where Celia is then going to shave Albert, and you can tell, this is great. The scene builds a lot of tension because we're intercutting with Nettie describing that Adam, one of her sons, whose name is Adam, is going to do a facial scarring ceremony with one of the local girls there named Tashi, because it's part of the tribal practices, and it's intercut with Celia. You can see she's going to attempt to kill Albert with the straight razor. So it's intercut with that and the facial scarring, which I think is problematic, where I think we're cutting murder with a cultural practice. And I think it's insinuating these tribal cultures in Africa are inherently barbaric. It's not a great way to do it. I don't think we needed to juxtapose that. I think we could have discussed the facial scarring ceremony separately from the intercut of murder, because I just think it adds something that it doesn't need to. Shug kind of realizes what's probably going to happen, and she runs and she grabs Celia's hand before Celia slits Albert's throat. We then cut to a scene at Thanksgiving, and Celia she's had enough, and she finally speaks up about the abuse, and this sort of perks up Sophia. Sophia then has her monologue that Oprah ad-libbed. This sort of sparks the Harpo's wife, Squeak, to speak up and about her abuse, and they're all pushing back. And I think what I love about this scene, it's the power of when you empower one woman, you can empower many, because we just have this way of connecting and empowering each other, and seeing somebody else stand up for what is right, stand up for themselves, gives others courage to do it for themselves. And then Celia says, until you do right by me, everything you do is going to fail. And so she gets up and she leaves, and her and Shug and Squeak all go with Grady, and they all drive off. So then we cut to years later, and Mr. His house has fallen into disrepair. Harpo has made amends with Sophia. That's after Squeak has left him, and they run the juke together. Shug still performs there. Celia's father eventually dies. And she learns through Nettie's letters that he wasn't her real father, that he was her stepfather. So, that doesn't take away from any. I think they over melodramatize that into a positive thing. I think if somebody still raises you, they still are your father. But essentially, like, Celie's children are safe from any sort of genetic issues based upon that. Like, they aren't receiving genetics that are father-daughter. They're receiving genetics that are, totally different in outside families. So it is marginally better, I guess, but it's over dramatized in a way where it's like, like, it's still the man who raised you. It's not any less horrible, I think, to have that happen. Now that we learn that he is not the biological father, when her mother died, technically the property was supposed to go to Nettie and Celie. So she takes it over and she opens a shop where she makes pants. She's pretty happy about making pants. Mr. then receives a letter that was addressed to Celie, but it's from Nettie. And he decides that he's going to do right by Celie after her warning many years ago and everything's fallen into disrepair. And he arranges for Nettie and Celie's children and her husband, who is the pastor, because the pastor's wife died. I guess he just married the next closest person. He arranges for them to return home to the United States. And we see them reunite. When they come back, it's this very emotional, I believe, over-dramatized thing where Mr. stands in the distance and they do their patty cake thing in this field again. I do like the full circle moment of the childhood game. I really like that. I don't like the over-dramatization, and I don't like that Mr. watches kind of from a distance. In the book, there's a lot more nuance where Celie and Mr. later sort of come to an understanding as sort of not necessarily friends, but they're able to sort of discuss things and have more of a relationship that's less like, I don't know if it's sort of like magical karma that he's trying to correct or whatever in this film. But it's quite a Spielberg way of doing stuff that it just doesn't feel works with the source material. The source material is so much more nuanced. So that is The Color Purple. I hope I have done it justice, guys. I did my best. It was a difficult one to try and wade through because I just want to make sure that I'm as culturally sensitive as I can be. I'm still kind of doing as much learning as I can on my own. So I hope I did an okay job, guys. So this ends Summer of Spielberg, and we are kicking off spooky season starting next week. Have a great Sunday.